Chapter 1. China. The civilization that refused to end China did not begin as a nation. It began as continuity. Along the Yellow River, where floods destroyed as often as they nourished, survival demanded memory. Villages learned to rebuild in the same places, season after season, generation after generation. Collapse was expected. Disappearance was not. From the beginning, China learned something rare: how to endure failure. Dynasties rose, claiming the mandate of heaven, and fell when famine, corruption, or rebellion proved that mandate lost. This cycle did not weaken the civilization, it trained it. Each collapse became instruction. Each restoration carried forward what had worked and discarded what had not. Power in China was never only military. It was administrative. While other civilizations tied authority to individuals, China tied it to systems records, rituals, examinations, hierarchies. Rulers came and went. The structure remained. Bureaucracy became the spine that allowed the state to bend without breaking. Writing unified distance. Ritual unified diversity. History unified identity. China recorded itself relentlessly. Victories, failures, floods, omens, rebellions. Nothing was forgotten. Memory became governance. The past was not worshipped, it was consulted. Foreign conquerors misunderstood this. They believed defeating armies meant defeating China. But armies were replaceable. What endured was the civil order beneath them. Conquerors could sit on the throne, but they ruled only by becoming Chinese. Walls symbolized this logic. Not barriers of isolation, but tools of management, defining space, organizing labor, projecting permanence. The Great Wall was less a defense than a declaration. The state would outlast the threat. China did not expand endlessly like empires of conquest. It consolidated. Its strength lay not in speed, but in absorption. Ideas, religions, technologies arrived from outside and were reshaped, classified, and woven into an existing framework. Nothing entered unchanged. This was not rigidity, it was control. By the time nomadic powers gathered beyond its borders, China was already ancient, layered with precedent, bound by ritual, confident in survival even when defeated. The Mongols would test this belief. They would conquer China with force unmatched in history. They would rule it as emperors, and in time they would be absorbed by the very civilization they had overcome. China did not resist the storm by stopping it. It endured by outlasting it. And this pattern: collapse, conquest, adaptation, restoration would repeat across millennia, shaping a civilization that did not seek immortality, yet repeatedly achieved it. China was not invincible, it was persistent, and persistence over time proves stronger than conquest. Chapter 2. China, Heaven, Order, and the Fear of Chaos. China feared chaos more than tyranny. From its earliest political imagination, disorder was not merely inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Floods, famine, rebellion, and invasion were seen as symptoms of a deeper imbalance between heaven, earth, and human rule. To govern China was not only to command armies, but to maintain cosmic order. This belief shaped everything. The mandate of heaven was not divine favoritism, it was conditional legitimacy. A ruler governed only so long as harmony endured. Natural disasters, widespread suffering, or moral decay were interpreted as warnings. Rebellion, once successful, retroactively proved righteousness. This logic created a paradox. Rebellion was treasonant it won. Failure was immorality until it succeeded. Chinese rulers understood this danger. Power was fragile, not because it lacked force, but because it was always being judged by outcomes. Stability was proof of virtue. Chaos was evidence of failure. To prevent chaos, China built systems rather than cults. The state expanded its reach, not primarily through conquest, but through administration. Land was surveyed, taxes were recorded, labor was registered, the population was counted and classified. Control was exerted not at the frontier, but at the village level. This was governance as infrastructure. The emperor stood at the apex, but he ruled through layers, officials, magistrates, clerks, each bound by ritual, law, and record. Power flowed downward in forms. Responsibility flowed upward in reports. Writing was the bloodstream of the state. Unlike warrior cultures, China mistrusted unchecked military power. Generals were rotated. Armies were divided. No commander was allowed to grow indispensable. The court feared internal usurpation more than external threat. History had taught it that dynasties rarely fell to foreigners. First, they rotted from within. Confucian philosophy reinforced this structure. Order, hierarchy, and moral restraint were elevated above heroism and conquest. The ideal official was not a conqueror, but a mediator. Loyalty was directed toward the system, not the individual ruler. Merit mattered, but only when disciplined. The civil service examination system transformed ambition into obedience. Talent was recruited, tested, and absorbed. Scholars memorized classics not to think freely, but to think correctly. Originality was less valuable than reliability. This created stability. It also created rigidity. China's strength lay in repetition. Its weakness lay there as well. When systems worked, they endured for centuries. When they failed comprehensively. Dynasties rose, promising restoration. They codified laws, repaired canals, redistributed land, and revived ritual. For a time, harmony returned. Prosperity followed. Population grew. Then pressure accumulated. Corruption crept in. Officials protected each other. Taxes burdened peasants. Armies grew expensive. Disasters struck. Rebellions ignited. The mandate wavered. Collapse followed not as surprise, but as pattern. Yet China did not vanish. Villages remained. Families endured. Records survived. New rulers stepped into old frameworks. The names changed. The structure persisted. This was China's deepest instinct. Never start from nothing. Even conquest followed this rule. Foreign rulers who tried to govern China without its systems failed quickly. Those who adopted its bureaucracy, rituals, and language endured longer, often at the cost of their own identity. China did not defeat its enemies only with walls or armies. It defeated them with continuity. Chaos was feared, studied, and institutionalized. Disorder was not denied, was anticipated, contained, and eventually recycled into renewal. This is why China survived repeated collapse, not because it avoided failure, but because it learned how to live through it. Chapter 3: China Rivers of Life, Rivers of Death. China was built by water and nearly destroyed by it. The great rivers that nourished civilization also threatened its existence. The Yellow River, thick with silt, changed course without warning. It flooded villages, erased farmlands, and buried entire communities beneath mud. To live beside it was to accept that survival depended not on courage, but on coordination. From the beginning, China learned a hard truth. Nature could not be conquered, only managed. Flood control became governance. Dikes, canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems were not merely engineering projects, they were political acts. Whoever controlled the water controlled food. Whoever controlled food controlled stability. This reality reshaped the Chinese state. Unlike civilizations centered on trade or conquest, China was agrarian at its core. The peasant was not peripheral. He was essential. His labor fed the empire. His suffering threatened it. His rebellion could topple dynasties. As a result, rulers obsessed over grain. Granaries were built to store surplus for famine years. Taxation was often paid in rice or wheat. Transport canals linked regions to ensure food could move faster than unrest. The Grand Canal was not luxury, it was survival infrastructure. When these systems worked, China prospered. When they failed, catastrophe followed. Floods destroyed crops, famines spread, banditry increased. Desperate peasants joined rebellions, not out of ideology, but hunger. Each uprising followed a familiar pattern. Local collapse escalated into national crisis. Heaven, once again, seemed displeased. The state understood this connection deeply. Officials were judged by their ability to prevent disaster. Flood control failures could end careers or dynasties. Natural calamity was never natural in political terms. It was interpreted as administrative failure. This belief imposed immense pressure. Rulers invested heavily in hydraulic projects. Engineers gained status. Mathematics, surveying, and labor organization became state priorities. Tens of thousands were mobilized to move earth, reinforce banks, and redirect flows. These projects saved lives. They also killed many. Forced labor was brutal. Workers died from exhaustion, disease, and accidents. Resentment simmered beneath the surface of state ambition. The same projects that sustained civilization also sowed anger among those compelled to build them. Thus, water became both unifier and divider. In times of stability, canals connected regions, cultures, and economies. Rice from the south fed cities in the north. Trade flourished. Population expanded. China became densely interconnected. In times of crisis, water became weaponized. Rebels broke dikes to flood cities. Retreating armies destroyed irrigation to starve enemies. Floods were deliberately unleashed, sacrificing land and people to slow invasions. The river became an instrument of war. No civilization understood this duality better than China. The landscape itself shaped political psychology. Survival required long-term planning, collective labor, and centralized authority. Individual heroism mattered less than coordination. A single village could not tame a river, only the state could. This reinforced obedience. People tolerated authority, not because it was gentle, but because disorder was worse. Without management, rivers destroyed everything. Without hierarchy, nothing endured. Yet the rivers never truly submitted. Silt accumulated, channels shifted, dikes weakened. Each generation had to rebuild what the previous one had maintained. There was no final victory, only ongoing effort. This endless struggle defined China's relationship with time. Civilization was not a finished achievement. It was constant maintenance. Dynasties that remembered this endured longer. Those that neglected it fell quickly. When officials grew corrupt and maintenance budgets disappeared, floods returned and rebellion followed close behind. Thus, The rivers wrote history as surely as emperors did. They taught China humility, patience, and fear. They demanded cooperation and punished neglect. They ensured that governance remained practical, grounded, and inseparable from the land. China did not worship nature. It negotiated with it endlessly, and in that negotiation, it forged a civilization capable of surviving both abundance and ruin. Chapter 4: China Walls, Frontiers, and the fear of the open steppe. China's greatest fear did not come from the sea. It came from the open land beyond its northern horizon. While rivers threatened from within, the steppe threatened from without, vast, borderless, and impossible to control. The northern plains produced peoples who lived without walls, without cities, and without agriculture. To a sedentary civilization built on order and records, this world was deeply unsettling. Nomads could appear without warning. They required no supply lines. They left nothing to capture. China could not absorb them. Island could not ignore them. This tension shaped centuries of policy. Early Chinese states attempted expansion into the steppe and failed. Cavalry, warfare, mobility, and decentralized command overwhelmed infantry-based armies tied to farmland and logistics. The steppe was not a territory to be governed, it was an environment to be endured. The response was not conquest, it was containment. Walls began as local fortifications, earthen embankments, protecting farms and towns. Over time, these fragments were linked, extended, reinforced. What emerged was not a single structure, but a philosophy: defense through definition. The Great Wall did not stop invasions completely, it slowed them. It signaled boundaries. It bought time. Time, in Chinese strategy, mattered more than decisive victory. Garrisons monitored movement. Beacons relayed warnings across vast distances. The wall became an early warning system, not an impenetrable barrier. Its true function was administrative as much as military. It also served a psychological purpose. The wall separated two worlds: the ordered realm of fields, records, and hierarchy, and the unpredictable freedom of the steppe. To those within, it symbolized civilization. To those beyond, it symbolized exclusion. Yet walls alone were insufficient. China adopted a second strategy: diplomacy through dependency. Nomadic leaders were bribed with silk, grain, and titles. Trade was regulated through tribute systems. Steppe elites were encouraged to rely on Chinese goods. Intermarriage tied frontier chieftains to the court. This was not weakness. It was calculated entanglement. China understood that it could not destroy the steppe without becoming something it was not. Instead, it sought to manage its threats by reshaping incentives. War was costly. Stability could be purchased. This approach produced mixed results. At times, peace held for generations. At others, the steppe unified under powerful leaders who saw China not as partner, but prize. When that happened, walls fell, treaties collapsed, and invasion followed. Each invasion exposed a contradiction. China was wealthy, populous, and sophisticated, yet often militarily vulnerable. Its armies were large, but slow. Its commanders cautious. Its court suspicious of generals. When nomadic confederations were fragmented, China dominated. When they united, China suffered. The wall then was never enough. What ultimately decided survival was adaptation. China learned to recruit cavalry, adopt steppe tactics, and employ frontier peoples within its armies. Over time, the line between Chinese and barbarian blurred. Frontier regions became cultural hybrid zones of exchange as much as conflict. Still, anxiety remained. The open steppe represented everything China was not: mobility without bureaucracy, power without paperwork, loyalty without law. It challenged the belief that order required structure. Every dynasty wrestled with this fear. Some responded with isolation, others with expansion, most with compromise. None solved it permanently. The Great Wall stands today not as proof of invincibility, but of persistence. It represents a civilization constantly negotiating its limits, aware that absolute security was impossible, yet unwilling to abandon the attempt. China did not seek to close itself off from the world. It sought to control the terms of contact, and in doing so, it revealed a core truth of its history. China survived not by eliminating threats, but by managing them patiently, imperfectly, and endlessly. Chapter 5: China the Family as Empire. China did not begin with the state. It began with the family. Long before emperors ruled from palaces, authority was exercised within households. Obedience, hierarchy, duty, and loyalty were learned first at home. The state did not replace these relationships, scaled them. This was China's most enduring design. Confucian thought framed society as an extension of familial order. The emperor was the father of the realm. Officials were elder brothers. Subjects were children whose duty was respect, not participation. Moral authority flowed downward. Obligation flowed upward. This structure created stability. People understood their place. Roles were inherited, rehearsed, and reinforced through ritual. Harmony was valued above justice. Conflict was not resolved through confrontation, but through mediation and shame. Law existed, but morality came first. Unlike legalist systems that ruled through punishment alone, China blended law with ethics. The ideal society was not one where crimes were punished efficiently, but one where crimes were unnecessary because behavior was regulated internally. Filial piety became the cornerstone. To honor one's parents was to honor the past. Ancestor worship bound the living to the dead, reinforcing continuity across generations. Individual desire was subordinated to family reputation. A person did not act alone. They acted as a representative of lineage. This mindset had consequences. Innovation was cautious. Dissent was dangerous. Change was slow. But endurance was unmatched. The family absorbed shocks that the state could not. When dynasties collapsed, households persisted. Lineages preserved land, memory, and identity. In times of chaos, people retreated not to ideology, but to kinship. The state relied on this. Officials governed indirectly through local elite clan leaders, elders, scholars, who enforced norms without constant coercion. Authority was dispersed, yet aligned. The empire functioned because millions of families self-regulated according to shared values. Education reinforced the system. Boys studied classics that emphasized obedience, loyalty, and moral restraint. Success in examinations brought honor not only to the individual, but to the entire family. Ambition was domesticated, redirected toward service rather than rebellion. Even rebellion followed familial logic. Uprisings were often framed as restoration of moral order, not its destruction. Leaders claimed to protect the people as righteous fathers, correcting corrupt elders. Revolution spoke the language of tradition. Women occupied a paradoxical role, formally subordinate, they nonetheless held families together. Through marriage alliances, inheritance management, and child rearing, women shaped social continuity. Their influence was indirect but profound, operating within boundaries rather than challenging them. This system imposed heavy costs. Individual freedom was limited. Social mobility was constrained. Those who did not fit prescribed roles, merchants, artisans, outsiders occupied ambiguous positions. Creativity often survived only when disguised as tradition. Yet the model endured because it worked. China did not require constant force to govern. Norms enforced themselves. Shame restrained behavior more effectively than fear. Loyalty to family translated into loyalty to state. The empire did not collapse when rulers failed. It contracted, reconfigured, and waited, because beneath every dynasty lay the same foundation: households bound by obligation, memory, and survival. This is why China could survive centuries of turmoil without losing its core identity. Empires fell, families remained, and through families, the idea of China persisted quietly, stubbornly, and intact. Chapter 6: China Faith Without a Single God. China was never ruled by one god, it was ruled by balance. Unlike civilizations built around exclusive deities and absolute revelation, Chinese belief evolved as a layered system, practical, adaptable, and deeply intertwined with daily life. Faith was not about salvation, it was about harmony. Heaven was not personal, earth was not sacred. The cosmos was relational. At the center stood Tianhevenot, as a god who commanded, but as a principle that responded. Heaven rewarded order and punished chaos, not through miracles, but through outcomes. Floods, famine, prosperity, and peace were messages written into reality. This made belief empirical. If things went well, the ruler was virtuous. If things collapsed, legitimacy dissolved. Religion became inseparable from governance. Ritual mattered more than creed. Correct performance ensured balance. Incorrect performance invited disaster. Emperors were not prophets, they were mediators, responsible for maintaining alignment between cosmic forces and human society. Alongside this cosmic order emerged Taoism. Taoism did not demand obedience. It warned against excess. It taught that forcing order could produce chaos, and that withdrawal could be strength. Nature was not an enemy to be subdued, but a process to be understood. For rulers, Taoism was unsettling. It questioned ambition. It mocked rigidity. It valued emptiness over control. Yet it endured because it addressed what the state could not: the individual's relationship with uncertainty. When bureaucracy suffocated, Taoism offered escape. When laws constrained, it offered flexibility. Then came Buddhism. Arriving from outside, it challenged core assumptions. Suffering was universal. Desire was the cause. Liberation lay beyond family, beyond state, beyond worldly duty. For a civilization built on obligation, this was radical. At first, Buddhism was resisted. Monks did not marry. They paid no taxes. They withdrew from ancestral rites. This threatened the social order. Yet Buddhism offered something China lacked: an answer to suffering that was not political. It promised meaning when systems failed. During times of war and collapse, monasteries became refuges. Compassion filled gaps left by administration. Rather than eradicated, China absorbed it. Buddhism was Sinicized, translated, ritualized, aligned with existing values. Filial piety was reinterpreted. Meditation was structured. Monastic institutions were regulated. It became Chinese without ceasing to be Buddhist. The result was not conflict, but coexistence. Confucianism governed society. Taoism addressed nature and spontaneity. Buddhism addressed suffering and impermanence. Individuals moved between them without contradiction. This pluralism was pragmatic. Belief systems were evaluated by utility, not exclusivity. A ruler could sponsor temples and enforce Confucian law. A scholar could write moral essays and practice meditation. Faith adapted to need. There was no religious war for dominance. Instead, there was negotiation. This flexibility strengthened China. No single doctrine could fracture society completely. When one belief system failed to explain reality, another compensated. Spiritual resilience mirrored political resilience, yet tolerance had limits. When religious movements became mass mobilizations challenging authority, rather than supplementing it, they were crushed. Belief was acceptable so long as it reinforced order. Faith was not sovereign, the state was. China did not seek divine truth, it sought stability. And in that pursuit, it crafted a spiritual landscape uniquely suited to endurance, one that absorbed ideas without surrendering control, and offered meaning without demanding obedience to a single god. Chapter 7. China. The Middle Kingdom and the world beyond China did not see itself as one nation among many. It saw itself as the center. The concept of Zhongwutha, Middle Kingdom, was not arrogance in the modern sense. It was a worldview shaped by geography, continuity, and scale. Surrounded by mountains, deserts, and seas, China developed largely on its own terms. When it looked outward, it did not see equals, it saw distance. Foreign lands were not mapped as competitors, but as concentric circles of decreasing familiarity. The closer a people was to Chinese norms, the more civilized they were considered. Distance was measured culturally, not racially. This perspective shaped diplomacy. China did not practice international relations as mutual recognition between sovereign states. It practiced hierarchy. Foreign rulers were incorporated into a tribute system, acknowledging the Chinese emperor's symbolic supremacy in exchange for trade rights, protection, and legitimacy. This system was not conquest by force, it was order by ritual. Envoys performed kowtow, gifts were exchanged, titles were granted. The ceremony mattered more than the material value. The message was clear. Participation required acceptance of the world's structure. Many outsiders accepted this willingly. The benefits were substantial. Access to Chinese markets, goods, and technology outweighed the cost of symbolic submission. For smaller states, the system offered stability. For China, it offered control without occupation. This worldview limited expansion. China rarely sought distant colonies. It did not pursue global domination. Its ambition was inward, perfecting order within defined boundaries. The outside world was something to manage, not conquer. When foreign powers approached as equals, confusion followed. China had no framework for parity. Equality implied disorder. To treat another ruler as equal threatened the cosmic hierarchy. Diplomacy became ritualized avoidance rather than negotiation. Trade flourished despite this. Silk, porcelain, teas, goods traveled far beyond China's borders. Caravans crossed Central Asia. Ships sailed south to Southeast Asia and beyond. Yet commerce was seen as secondary, even suspicious. Merchants ranked low in social hierarchy. Wealth without moral authority was distrusted. Still, interaction was unavoidable. Ideas moved with goods. Buddhism entered along trade routes. Technologies spread outward. Foreign knowledge was filtered through Chinese categories and often stripped of its origins. Innovation was absorbed quietly. At times, China turned inward deliberately. Fearing instability, rulers restricted trade, banned travel, and limited contact. These periods were not isolationist in intent, but conservative in instinct. The goal was preservation, not ignorance. Such policies worked until they did not. When the outside world changed faster than China's internal systems, imbalance emerged. Assumptions of centrality became vulnerabilities. What had once ensured stability began to constrain adaptation. Yet, for centuries, the Middle Kingdom worldview endured because it matched reality. China was large, wealthy, and internally coherent. Few external powers could challenge it directly. Those who tried often failed, succeeded only temporarily before being absorbed. China did not need to prove superiority. It assumed it. This assumption shaped every interaction, every ritual, every border. It created confidence, but also blindness. When the world beyond the horizon transformed, China would struggle to recalibrate its place within it. But for most of its history, the system held. The Middle Kingdom did not seek the world. The world came to it. Chapter 8: China Invention Without Revolution. China was among the world's greatest innovators. It just did not let innovation overturn order. Paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass. These inventions reshaped human history. Yet, within China, they were absorbed quietly, managed carefully, and rarely allowed to disrupt existing hierarchies. Change was permitted, but transformation was restrained. This was intentional. Chinese governance prized stability over speed. New technologies were evaluated not for their potential, but for their risk. Could they empower unrest? Could they bypass authority? Could they undermine social roles? If the answer was yes, adoption slowed. Printing expanded literacy, but primarily among elites. Texts reinforced orthodoxy rather than challenge it. The same classics were reproduced endlessly, preserving consensus rather than provoking debate. Gunpowder was used for fireworks, signaling, and limited warfare long before it was weaponized fully. The state feared that uncontrolled military innovation could destabilize internal order more than it feared foreign invasion. The compass aided navigation, but maritime expansion remained cautious. Overseas exploration occurred, but without imperial ambition. When voyages ended, they ended deliberately. China invented tools that could have enabled industrial revolution. It chose not to pursue one. This was not ignorance. It was governance by restraint. The state understood that rapid change produced social dislocation. Urbanization, class upheaval, and uncontrolled markets threatened harmony. Innovation that strengthened administration was welcomed. Innovation that empowered individuals beyond the system was not. Craft knowledge often remained localized. Artisans passed techniques through guilds or families. Knowledge was practical, not theoretical. Experimentation existed, but without institutional pressure to scale or disrupt. Markets functioned, but under suspicion. Merchants accumulated wealth, but lacked prestige. Profit without moral contribution was viewed as corrosive. The state regulated trade to prevent monopolies, hoarding, and speculation. Economic dynamism was permitted only within boundaries. This approach produced long-term stability. China sustained large populations with consistent agricultural productivity. Urban centers thrived without extreme inequality. Social roles remained intelligible. Revolutions were rare and usually framed as restorations. Yet the cost was stagnation. Without competitive pressure, innovation plateaued. Without institutional support, breakthroughs did not compound. Without ideological support for change, disruption was suppressed. The system assumed that the past had already discovered what mattered. This assumption held while the world moved slowly. It would not hold forever. When external powers embraced relentless innovation, weaponizing science, industrializing warfare, and reorganizing economies, China's model showed strain. Technologies once invented in China returned, transformed, now tools of dominance rather than curiosity. What had once been restraint became vulnerability. Still, this chapter of history cannot be judged solely by its end. For centuries, China demonstrated that innovation was not destiny. Progress did not have to mean upheaval. Knowledge could serve continuity rather than revolution. China proved that a civilization could be advanced without being unstable. It also proved that stability, if preserved too carefully, could become resistance to change. Invention without revolution was a choice. It shaped a civilization that endured longer than any other and delayed the reckoning that would one day arrive. Chapter NINE China. When the world arrived by force, China did not go out to meet the modern world. The modern world came to normed. For centuries, China had assumed that external powers would approach on familiar terms: tribute, trade, controlled contact. What arrived instead were empires that did not seek ritual recognition, but material advantage, then were willing to enforce it with violence. The imbalance was immediate. European powers arrived with industrialized navies, disciplined armies, and a worldview built on competition between equal sovereign states. They did not accept hierarchy, they demanded access. China had no category for this. The court interpreted foreign aggression as disruption, not transformation. Officials sought to manage the crisis with the tools they knew: edicts, restrictions, negotiations, framed as moral correction. It failed. The Opium Wars exposed a devastating truth. Military superiority no longer depended on population size or endurance. It depended on technology, logistics, and industrial output. China's armies were brave, numerous, and outdated. Defeat shattered assumptions. Treaty ports were forced open. Extraterritorial rights undermined sovereignty. Tariffs were imposed from outside. The tributary system collapsed under pressure. It was never designed to withstand. China was not merely losing wars, it was losing control of time. Foreign powers moved faster, innovating rapidly, adapting tactics, reorganizing economies. China's systems, optimized for continuity, struggled to respond. Reforms were debated cautiously, while crises multiplied. Internal pressure grew. Rebellions erupted on unprecedented scale. The Taiping Rebellion blended religious fervor with social rage, devastating vast regions. Tens of millions died. The state survived, but only barely. Elites were forced to reconsider. Some advocated wholesale westernization. Others demanded selective adoption, Chinese essence, foreign technique. Reformers pushed for new schools, industries, and military modernization. Conservatives feared that change itself was the greater threat. The result was paralysis. Reform arrived late and unevenly. Modern weapons were purchased without modern institutions. Factories were built without restructuring authority. Education expanded without political reform. China attempted modernization without transformation. It was not enough. Foreign encroachment continued. Japan, once a tributary state, modernized aggressively and defeated China, shattering remaining illusions of cultural superiority. The Middle Kingdom was no longer central. This realization was traumatic. Intellectuals questioned everything: Confucianism, monarchy, tradition itself. The old answers no longer explained suffering. The social contract fractured. Loyalty to dynasty eroded. Yet collapse did not mean erasure. Even in humiliation, China absorbed lessons. Railways were laid. Telegraphs connected cities. New ideologies circulated. The seeds of transformation were planted in crisis. The old order could not be restored. Something new would have to replace it. China entered the modern world not as a confident participant, but as a wounded survivor forced to adapt under pressure, carrying centuries of continuity into an era that rewarded rupture. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 10: China Revolution Without Rest. China did not experience one revolution. It experienced many without pause. The collapse of the imperial system did not deliver clarity. It removed the framework that had organized power for 2 millennia, leaving behind a vacuum filled by competing visions, ideologies, and ambitions. The fall of the Qing dynasty ended the mandate of heaven. Nothing replaced it cleanly. Republican ideals arrived without institutions capable of sustaining them. Warlords carved territory. Foreign powers exploited fragmentation. The state existed in name, not in function. For the first time in history, China confronted a terrifying possibility that continuity itself might end. Intellectuals searched desperately for answers. Confucian hierarchy was blamed for weakness. Western liberalism promised freedom but lacked resonance. Nationalism inspired unity but could not resolve inequality. Into this chaos entered revolution as necessity. Marxism offered something radical, an explanation for suffering rooted in material conditions, and a promise of total transformation. It rejected gradual reform. It demanded rupture. For a civilization trained to restore rather than reinvent, this was unprecedented. Revolution did not proceed cleanly. Civil war tore the country apart. Ideologies clashed, not only in theory, but on battlefields. The countryside suffered most. Millions were mobilized, displaced, or killed. Survival replaced philosophy. When the communists emerged victorious, they inherited devastation. They also inherited China's deepest instincts. Despite revolutionary rhetoric, the new state rebuilt familiar structures. Central authority was restored. Bureaucracy returned. Hierarchy reasserted itself. The language changed. The logic remained. Revolution promised equality. Reality demanded control. Land was redistributed. Old elites were destroyed. New ones emerged. Campaigns reshaped society through mass mobilization, surveillance, and ideological discipline. The state penetrated daily life more deeply than any dynasty before it. This created unity. It also created trauma. Experiments in rapid transformation forced collectivization. Ideological purges produced catastrophe. Famine returned on a scale unseen in modern times. The cost of acceleration was measured in lives, yet the state survived. Again, China demonstrated its grim resilience. Failures were acknowledged indirectly. blamed on deviation rather than principle. Policies shifted. Pragmatism reasserted itself beneath revolutionary language. China adapted without abandoning control. The revolutionary period did not end in stability. It ended in exhaustion. By the late 20th century, ideology alone could no longer sustain legitimacy. Economic survival became the new mandate. Prosperity replaced purity as justification for authority. China had not found rest, it had found momentum. The revolution had destroyed the old order, but the need for order remained. What emerged was not a break from history, but a continuation under different symbols. China changed everything so that it could remain itself. Chapter 11. China Prosperity as Discipline. China's return to stability did not come through ideology, it came through survival. After decades of upheaval, exhaustion reshaped priorities. The question was no longer how to transform society, but how to keep it functioning. Prosperity became the new language of legitimacy. Reform did not begin with freedom. It began with permission. Markets were reopened cautiously. Farmers were allowed to profit from surplus. Special zones experimented with capitalism under strict supervision. Growth was encouraged not as liberation, but as discipline. Economic success became a test of loyalty. The state did not retreat, it recalibrated. Authority remained centralized. Political power stayed tightly controlled. What changed was the method of consent. Stability was purchased through rising living standards. Opportunity replaced ideology as motivation. This produced astonishing results. Cities expanded at unprecedented speed. Infrastructure rose almost overnight. Hundreds of millions were lifted from poverty. China re-entered global trade not as subordinate, but as indispensable. Yet control never disappeared. Surveillance modernized. Censorship adapted. Institutions grew more sophisticated. Where ideology once demanded belief, prosperity demanded compliance. The social contract was clear. You may pursue wealth, you may not challenge order. Tradition quietly returned. Family regained importance as safety net. Education resumed its role as mobility mechanism. Examinations modernized once again sorted ambition. Merit was rewarded, but only within defined paths. History was reinterpreted. The past was no longer condemned entirely, nor fully restored. It was curated. Dynasties, revolutions, and reforms were framed as steps in a continuous national journey. Disruption was acknowledged, but continuity emphasized. This narrative reinforced legitimacy. China was no longer catching up, it was reclaiming. Global integration brought new tensions. Inequality widened. Environmental costs mounted. Cultural pressure increased. Yet instability was contained through scale, planning, and intervention. Crisis was managed, not dramatized. Prosperity became expectation. With it came new anxieties. Growth slowed, demographics shifted, aspirations rose faster than opportunity. The old bargain growth for obedience faced strain. Still, the instinct remained unchanged. Order first, adaptation second. Transformation only when unavoidable. China did not promise individual fulfillment. It promised endurance. Prosperity was not an end state. It was a mechanism one, more tool in a long tradition of survival through adjustment rather than surrender. The system had changed. The logic had not. Chapter 12. China What endures when everything changes? China has changed its rulers, its ideologies, its economy, and its place in the world. What it has not changed is its relationship with time. Across millennia, China learned to think in centuries rather than moments. Defeat was temporary. Collapse was cyclical. Survival was assumed. Where other civilizations feared endings, China prepared for returns. This mindset shaped every adaptation. When dynasties fell, the state was rebuilt. When belief systems failed, they were revised. When ideologies collapsed, pragmatism replaced purity. China did not cling to form, it preserved function. The enduring core was not a ruler, a doctrine, or a border. It was the belief that order must exist, that it could be reconstructed after ruin. Continuity was not accidental. It was engineered through memory, institutions, and habit. History was never discarded. It was repurposed. China recorded failure as carefully as success. Each catastrophe became instruction. Each recovery reinforced confidence that restoration was possible. The past was not a burden, it was a manual. This produced patience. Change was approached cautiously. Disruption was feared. Stability was prized even when imperfect. China accepted inefficiency if it preserved cohesion. It tolerated contradiction if it prevented fracture. The modern world demands speed. China responds with scale. Rather than sudden leaps, it advances through accumulation, layering policy upon policy, reform upon reform. Mistakes are absorbed. Corrections are made quietly. Momentum is maintained even when direction shifts. This frustrates outsiders. China does not move to prove a point. It moves to avoid collapse. Its power is not charismatic. It is structural. The state remains central not as ideology, but as coordinator. Society is allowed flexibility, but within boundaries. Individual ambition is encouraged, but only when aligned with collective stability. This balance is never perfect. Tension persists between control and creativity, unity and diversity, memory and change. China does not resolve these contradictions, it manages them. That management is its true skill. Empires rose and fell, believing permanence belonged to them. China endured by assuming impermanence and preparing for it. This is why conquest rarely erased it, why ideology never fully replaced it, why crisis reshaped it without destroying it. China is not ancient because it refuses to change. It is ancient because it knows how. What endures is not the past. What endures is the method. Observe, adjust, continue. And as long as that method survives, China will remain not unchanged, but unbroken. China does not ask whether it will endure. It assumes that it will. Across dynasties, revolutions, invasions, and reforms, the question has never been how to preserve a specific system, but how to prevent collapse from becoming extinction. Forms are discarded when they fail. Structures are rebuilt when they break. Continuity is not sentimental, it is strategic. What distinguishes China is not immunity to crisis, but familiarity with it. Chaos is expected. Stability is rebuilt. Time is treated not as an enemy, but as an ally. Where others seek final answers, China refines methods. Where others chase endings, China prepares for return. This does not make China static. It makes it adaptive in a way that resists spectacle. Its strength lies not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet ability to reorganize after loss, to absorb pressure without shattering, and to carry forward a sense of collective direction even when certainty disappears. China's story is not one of uninterrupted greatness. It is a record of survival through recalibration. Empires collapse, believing history ends with them. China persists because it never believed that as the world continues to change faster, louder, and more unstable, the question China has always asked remains the same. Not what must we become, but what must we preserve in order to continue? That question, more than any ideology or institution, is what endures.